The heartbeat bill debate may not be over at the State House. Joining us on Columbus on the Record this week, Andy Chow, State House reporter for Ohio Public Radio. Jim Siegel, State House reporter for the Columbus Dispatch. Michael Miller, former Franklin County prosecutor. And Sandy Tice, director of Progress Ohio. The divisive issue of abortion has divided even anti-abortion activists. Governor Kasich this week signed a bill that would ban abortion after 20 weeks, about a month earlier than Roe versus Wade allows. He vetoed a provision in another bill that would have banned abortions when a fetal heartbeat is detected, as early as 6 weeks and before many women realize they are pregnant. Kasich explained in a statement that he agrees with Ohio Right to Life and other leading pro-life advocates that the 20-week ban is the best, most legally sound and sustainable approach to protecting the sanctity of human life. Abortion rights supporters denounced both bills. In particular, they denounced the lack of exemptions for rape or incest. And the fight may not be over. Supporters of the heartbeat bill are trying hard to get the votes they need to override the governor's veto. Jim Siegel, where does that override effort start? Is there any chance that they could override the governor's veto?
Well, is there any chance? I don't know, maybe, but it's very, very small. There were 56 votes voted to pass the bill, the heartbeat bill. They need 60 votes in order to override. Now, 2 Republican members who support the heartbeat bill were not present for that vote, so if they showed up, then they'd have 58. They'd still need 2 more votes. We've talked with most of the no votes, at least the Republican no votes, and they say they are not switching. Some won't talk to us, but most of the who including some from Franklin County, yeah. But those who will say they're not going to switch. So, and this also assumes that they could next week, or the week of Christmas, and actually get everybody back into the chamber and have another vote. That also is highly unlikely. Just in an average week, there are 2 or 3 members, 2 or 3 Republicans who just aren't present for various reasons. And I know that and the closer we get to Christmas, the more and more of these members who are heading out of town, heading out of state, and they just won't be around to vote anyway. So it's a very, very low possibility that they get to a veto.
Are there some Republican lawmakers who supported the 20-week ban but didn't support the heartbeat that are under a lot of pressure, Andy, to switch their votes?
No, I mean, and if anything, there would be a lot of people under pressure to not vote on an override, because there might be people who would support the heartbeat bill, but not enough to cross the governor and really put themselves out there to vote on an overriding vote to override the governor. So I think there's a lot of political pressure on both sides, but I think if you were to try to bring people back, as Jim was saying, it would be a really tough sell to get people to even vote for an override to cross a governor that they're going to have to work with for the next 2 years.
Like Miller, everyone who voted for either of these bills is opposed to abortion. But the reason why folks chose the 20-week over the heartbeat is the constitutionality. That it's a legal reason. They don't think the heartbeat, the 6-week ban, would stand up in court.
Well, I don't think any of them think the 6-week ban has a chance. And I think from other rulings in other states and so forth, that is quite likely that they're absolutely right. And, this is like red states, blue states. I mean, whatever you do, there's people that are intractable in their positions. I hear what the governor does. He agrees with one, he vetoes the other, and he's under attack from both sides. It's going to stay that way. Whatever he does, he's going to be attacked. And seriously, because they take this issue, as they should, very seriously.
Now, Sandy, you are staunchly in the abortion rights category, work for NARAL. You don't like either bill.
In addition to not having an exception for rape or incest, the life of the mother one is so narrowly tailored, you have to be nearly dead for it to kick in. And it also doesn't have an exception for fetal anomalies. And what got lost in this debate is there are a lot of women who have late-term abortions and they terminated wanted pregnancies because they find out that the baby will never live. We had a press conference earlier this year with a 24-year-old from Cincinnati, pregnant by choice. She and her husband went in to find out the gender of the baby. She wanted a girl, he wanted a boy. They had a friendly wager, and they found out the baby was going to die. And so instead of caring for another 3 months and giving birth to a dead baby, she terminated. There's a closed Facebook group where women like this comfort each other, and this bill is mean. because it doesn't have those type of exceptions. And in other states, 20-week bans have been thrown out too as unconstitutional.
Jim, if the heartbeat bill stands as being vetoed and the 20-week bill stands, what's next in this? The 20-week ban will likely get challenged in court, but what's next at the State House? Is this it now for abortion restrictions, or are there going to be more abortion restrictions passed by this heavily Republican legislature?
The abortion issue will never be over at the State House until abortion is either the Supreme Court rules that we have to stop passing these types of things, chipping away at abortion rights, or the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, and it's just purely,
it goes the other
completely
way.
illegal.
Yeah.
Because I mean, look, not only is this a moral issue, an ethical issue for a number of people, it's a political issue, and political issues don't die easily. Republicans raise a lot of money off this issue. Democrats raise money off this issue. And it's, there is some benefit to keeping it going from that perspective, and I think it will. There are other bills out there that didn't pass. For example, one that would ban abortions if if it is being done because the baby has Down's, or the fetus has Down syndrome, and so there's that is getting into another murky area of this debate of kind of what's in a woman's head when she's deciding on whether to get an abortion. So but there are issues like that will continue to be pushed, and they'll continue to just, as long as Republicans continue to control things, they'll continue to try to chip away at it.
Mike, any fear of backlash that the Republicans could go too far and basically turn off independents who are not staunchly pro-choice, but also feel that there should be reasonable restrictions, but
Well, Mike,
abortion should be legal?
I think anytime you get an issue like this, it's so emotional that there's always a risk of backlash if somebody it goes too far. It can happen both ways. I just think nothing's safe. This is too much of an emotional issue for a lot of people. So anything is possible if the group of people decides that the legislature, somebody has gone a bridge too far, so to speak. Sure, you can risk backlash.
And so remember, the Ohio Right to Life was against the heartbeat bill, and it's not because they don't want to see a complete ban on abortion. They just think strategically it's not the way to go. So if the 20-week ban does hold up in court, I would expect to see, I don't know how soon down the line, a 15-week ban and then a 10-week ban. And I think that's the way that a lot of pro-lifers want to go, is to start chipping away in smaller increments. And they thought that this as early as 6-week ban was just too much of a big swing at the bat.
Sandy, is there a challenge already in the works for the 20-week ban?
There's going to be one. I'm not sure if Ohio's going to be the vehicle or other states. But in 1989, when the Webster decision came out and it gave states more leeway to restrict abortions, that's when a bunch of Democratic pro-choice women got elected. And this has gone too far, and I think we're going to see the same thing. I talked to all the organizations that recruit women to run for office. They say their phone's ringing off the hook. Girl power.
One important stat to note is going from 24 weeks, what we have now, down to 20. In 2015, 0.7% of all abortions were done after 20 weeks. So we are talking about a small slice of the.
And most
the
of those are the
totals.
ones that I talked about where somebody had terminated a wanted pregnancy because the mom's life was in danger or the baby would not make it.
Okay. Governor Kasich may not have put his veto pen away just yet. A couple of controversial lame duck bills sit ready for his signature or his veto. One of those bills refreezes requirements that utilities generate an increasing portion of electricity through alternative means. The so-called green energy mandates were signed by Governor Strickland, in place for a few years, and then frozen 3 years ago. Another bill would shut down all cabinet-level offices after 4 years unless the legislature says they can continue. Andy Chow, first to the green energy mandates. Governor Kasich says he's not a huge fan of this freeze, but is it enough to make him veto this bill?
I don't want to predict completely, but I really think that just given what he has said in the past, I don't see how he doesn't veto this. I think he's going to veto this bill because this is one of those big issues where he actually has put himself out there speaking to the legislature saying, listen, if you get rid of these standards, if you get rid of things that help develop green energy, then I will veto it. And this bill is very close, if not exactly what he was talking about. So I can't imagine a world where he doesn't veto this bill.
And he says, does he want any mandates? Does he want any relaxation of those mandates, or just wants green energy to take off with the with the mandates that Governor Strickland had proposed.
Well, the big critics of these mandates say that they're arbitrary. They just say 25 or 20 by 2025, and so people want something a little more exact, a little more science behind it to say, if we're going to increase incrementally how much green energy we're using, give me an idea of just how much that is and how much that would save money for customers, how much that would help develop green energy here. And so if they were pared down a little bit, I think that the governor would be okay with it. But this is, again, just another pause of the standards, or another provision that stops the standards from being required for another 2 years. And I think that's something that's just not going to work for the governor.
When you have these standards in place, what it does is it creates markets. And Ohio makes a lot of the component parts for the wind industry and the solar industry. And for a while, we led the nation in new green jobs. These are family-sustaining, good-paying manufacturing jobs. When we took away that certainty and took away these benchmarks, that slowed down a little bit. There were 60 green energy businesses that showed up at this hearing, packed the hearing room, and talked about how important this was. You would think that your party would be supportive of those businesses, Mike. What's going on?
What is the argument, Mike? The market should take care of this, and if green energy is going to make it, then it should make it on its own.
I think that's probably the general view of the Republican Party on this thing, and I happen to agree with Andy. I think that's what's going to happen with the bill, that the governor will ultimately veto it.
The other bill that possibly could get vetoed, Jim, is I call it the North Carolina Light Bill. In North Carolina, they're trying to strip away a lot of the new Democratic governor's powers. In Ohio, they're not really stripping it away. They're just trying to have it hang over their head, a little axe. Every 4 years, the legislature has to approve reauthorization of the Department of Transportation and other governor-led agencies. Where does this Where does this go?
Well, the only bill that's more likely to get vetoed than the green energy bill is this one, because it's from the governor's perspective, this is a clear legislative power grab, and there's no other way for him to view it. Now, whether or not you think it's a good idea or not is one thing, but why on earth Governor Kasich would sign this, it makes no sense from his perspective, because basically they're saying, because it's not even about the legislature saying, well, we can vote to dissolve or merge or do other things with your agencies if we don't feel they're doing right. Basically what they're saying is we can make your cabinet agencies disappear by doing nothing. We just don't have, if we don't pass a bill, your agencies cease to exist. And that is not something I think that Governor Kasich is going to think is a good idea. Actually, I guarantee you he doesn't think it's a good idea. I can tell you he doesn't.
Where did this come from? I mean, this is in North Carolina. They're trying to limit the governor's power because the governor is from the opposite party. Republicans control the legislature. Why are they trying? And granted, it's 4 years from now. I don't understand where this is coming from.
Well, President Keith Faber of the Senate, he wants to assert the legislature's authority, and he believes this is a better way for the legislature to take a closer look at how these agencies operate. And I mean, there's something to that, but they can already do a lot of that as it is
with the budget,
current process.
And this has been a theme from Senate President Keith Faber for a couple of months now. He's been talking about the balance of power, checks and balances, making sure that the legislature has as much power as the executive. And this all kind of started happening after the governor vetoed one of Faber's provisions. And so this is something that's come out of the Senate. The Senate rejected to approve one of the governor's PUCO nominees. They passed this green energy bill. There's been a rift between these two groups for a while now, and this is just an example of
Can't
that.
Republicans get along?
Well, we'll get to that later on.
Yeah, if we have another topic on this.
On my subject. Apparently they have some problems, Mike.
Yeah. Sandy, I mean,
It's like
What is-
Ronald Reagan said, the right hand doesn't know what the far right hand is doing. Faber really, I think, was emboldened by the Trump election, and he does have a rift with Kasich, and he's going to just keep poking at him.
but he's losing. He's moving to the House. He's not in a leadership position after.
And he wants to run statewide, too. He wants to run for state auditor, so I think he's trying to use this to raise his profile, too.
And those may not be the only vetoes we see. Senate Bill 235, which became a Christmas tree bill, there's a provision in there that grants, the Republicans in the legislature say it clarifies. The Department of Taxation takes a very different view of it. It's basically an exemption of the tangible personal property tax for oil and gas producers. As we know from the past, the Kasich administration and the oil and gas industry don't get along very well. They are not happy with that provision in that bill. That could be, you could see that one chucked out of that Christmas tree bill. And there is some concern about Senate Bill 199, the concealed carry bill. The business community is not happy about this bill because it no longer lets them ban guns in their parking lots. from employees. If an employee comes and locks their gun in the car and parks it in the lot, they no longer are allowed to ban that. So they're not happy with that bill. I don't know that that's going to be enough to get him to veto or not, but it's an issue.
Ohio's high school class of 2018 does not graduate for another 17 months. But as of right now, some are going to have to study a lot harder to get their diplomas. The State Board of Education this week left in place, for now, tougher high school graduation standards. The new rules require students get at least 18 points out of 36 on 7 year-end tests, or get a remediation-free score on a college entrance exam, or get professionally certified for a job. The problem is many state school superintendents say their students won't meet those standards, and up to 30% may fail in some districts. Board of Ed members put off a decision until spring. Sandy Tice, they want more information. What's wrong with these standards? Are they too tough?
Every couple years we change the rules. And every couple years, the first year when we change the rules, the scores go down, and then the teachers work to teach to the new test and the new standards, and then they start to go up. I think that's what we're seeing here. Nobody wants to lower the standards, but why don't they just pick some rules and stick with them? I think that makes a lot of sense.
These have been in place since, I think, 2014, when they were approved in 2014 or 2015.
I don't
right?
think they took effect until 2015.
But they knew they were coming, though.
They knew
3
they were
years ago.
coming, yeah. And so
But we've had different tests since then too. We've had the PARCC test, and then we've had the AIR test. So the tests have been changing while these standards have been starting to implement too. But
pick something, stick with it. It's really frustrating for the teachers. It's really frustrating for the kids. I know when my daughter was in 4th grade, and she's very smart, they could tell you how many of the kids for each 4th grade teacher, what the percentage rate was on the 4th grade proficiency test. And it really bothered me that the kids knew that. They didn't need that information. It put a lot of unnecessary pressure on them, and let's just let the teachers teach.
On the other hand, Mike, employers say, and even colleges are saying, we're not getting the type of high school student, graduate that we need. Many schools, many kids in college, 40% are having to take remediation courses because they're not up to where they have to be as a freshman in college. So something had to change, and that's why these rules were put in place.
I'm sure it did change for that very reason. The fact that the country, the United States, just not Ohio, ranks so low in some of these tests of mathematics and so forth when compared to other countries in the world. And I think that these guidelines are set up figuring this is what we need to do. And I believe the problem exists when you find so many kids that can't pass them. That creates a situation. We tell these kids they're not good enough and so forth. So it looks like to me on this bill, some people want to reduce it all the way down to 14. Is that going to increase the education? It is not, but at least it has more people pass. So do you want people coming out of high school who are truly qualified, or coming out with a diploma that really doesn't say much? Now, I understand there's a lot of reasons for that. There's poverty, there's family situations, all that sort of thing. It's a very tough problem, and I don't know the answer to it, but I had a client that represented one of the local high schools here, and I had taught it in high school. I had a tendency to look at all of that information, seeing who came in, the feeder system from the elementary schools and the feeder system from the middle schools. They were getting people that were below every test that had ever been given, and then you expect them to succeed.
Yeah.
It's awfully difficult.
So a couple things to keep in mind is that if you don't do well on a test, let's say you're in 10th grade, you don't do well on your math test, you go on to 11th grade, you can still retake that 10th grade test, but that's stuff you learned a year ago, and now you're trying to learn everything in 11th grade, but still trying to remember what you learned in 10th grade to pass that test again if you're trying to retake it.
This is like the 3rd grade reading guarantee, Jim. As Sandy said, it's a transition. They raise the standard, and teachers and students have to catch up.
And this has long been an issue, and I'm sure it's not just Ohio, but you've got to pick your standards, and then once you do, then you look at how the results are coming in. And the question is, do you want to stick to the standards that you think are right, or do you want the bell curve or whatever to look the way it should look? And then you adjust your standards that way. And Ohio's been doing that. They've been doing both. They've kind of, the pendulum is swinging around, and they're trying to find, what's the right way to test these kids so that we come up with numbers that make sense, and that it's not too hard to graduate, but it's not too easy to graduate either. And that's hard when you're talking about the diversity of kids, the diversity of districts that we have out there. And I don't know that this problem is ever going to go away. And it's this is just the latest incarnation, and I know that, but I do know, I've talked to some teachers, they just really wish, like Sandy said, the state would just stick to something and go with it.
Okay. Turning back to party politics, 4 years ago, supporters of John Kasich helped push out Kevin DeWine as chair of the state Republican Party and replace him with Matt Borges. Borges has had success. The party swept statewide offices in 2014. Donald Trump won Ohio easily in November, but Trump supporters want Borges out. They did not get along with the Kasich supporters during the 2016 campaign. Trump allies are trying to replace Borges with Jane Timken from Canton. Mike Miller, let me ask again. Can't Republicans get along?
Well, there's certainly different Republicans, aren't there, Michael? This is really interesting to me. You look at Matt Borges and what he did or what he led 2014. They swept every single office in the statewide. You look at the election here a couple of months ago, and Portman wins by 20%. I mean, just some stunning amount over a former governor. We've got President-elect Trump winning now. He doesn't think Borges did anything for him. He may be right, I don't know. But I don't think Borges is going to have a real problem. The name of this game is winning. And he's been there in 14 and he won. What happened with 14 with the Democrats? They forced their state chairman to resign because they lost everything. Now here we're coming 4 years later, wins again. I think probably the most powerful Republican in the state is John Kasich. He's absolutely behind Matt 100% as near as I can tell. So I think there'll be some bumps along the road, but I think Borges will be here for another term if he desires, and apparently he does.
How deep is this divide between Donald Trump supporters and John Kasich supporters? I mean, Kasich won the primary here in March, but he didn't get a majority of the vote. Granted, there were Trump was on the ballot and other Republican candidates on the ballot.
I think it depends on who you ask. I think if you ask the insider Republicans, the leadership in the Republican Party, I think they understand the kind of position Borges was in, and they knew that he kind of had to take a stance kind of in the middle where he wasn't completely for Trump, but he didn't seem like he was against him either. But then if you were to go outside of the party, outside of your typical leadership positions, I think they'd be singing a different tune. And so I think it all comes down to those local GOP chairs on the county level to see if Borges can talk to them and try to get them to understand his position on things. But if they don't and they want to move forward, that's going to be a tough sell.
Okay. Democrats are starting to regroup and get organized to fight statewide for offices in 2018. They want to avoid the disaster they suffered in 2014 and the bitter disappointment of 2016. Looking to shake things up, supporters of Bernie Sanders urge former state Senator Nina Turner to run for governor. She was a huge and very visible supporter of Bernie Sanders. Sandy, is Nina Turner the right person to run for governor in 2018?
That's an issue for the Democrats to decide, and I really get tired of people saying the Democrats don't have a farm team. They have a good farm team. Rich Cordray, 5-time Jeopardy champion running the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, brilliant. He's interested, or he's taken a look at it. Betty Sutton, a former congresswoman, she did Cash for Clunkers. It was effective and inventive, and it helped the auto industry here. All the congressional people would be good statewide candidates. Joe Schiavone, the Senate Minority Leader, he's interested in. Connie Pillich is interested. We have a good farm team, and what I like is that the rank and file are rising up and demanding changes, and I think they're going to get some.
Jim Siegel, they have to start now, though, because we all know those names, but they're not very well known statewide among average voters.
No, and they don't have any money either. So unlike number of the Republicans who are talking about running, who have been building up war chests for the last couple of years. So it's going to be difficult. But in the midterm, with Republicans in control of everything at the federal level, in control of everything at the state level, the governor said recently we are on the verge of a recession. If we actually start to truly head that direction, and the country heads that direction, and Donald Trump does some of the things that Democrats and others fear that he may do that may disrupt the population, Democrats could have some success. But as of right now, they are definitely starting off 2 steps behind because of name ID and money, and those are 2 big factors.
And it's a big election because that's the election where the winners will draw the congressional and legislative district lines in 2020. So, off the record time for our parting shots. Sandy Tice, we'll start with you.
In addition to the lame duck doing things to hurt poor people and women and state government, something wonderful happened, and we passed a really good bill that will help reduce our shamefully high infant mortality rate. All the women in the state Senate Democrats and Republicans joined together to pass this. It has a provision that will really increase access to long-term acting reversible birth control like the IUD. Charlita Tavares and Shannon Jones led the fight, and I want to publicly thank them for their work on that issue.
Mike Miller.
Well, I'll say something that I'm sure a lot of people think with me, it's not unique. I believe this next coming year is going to be one of the most interesting years in my lifetime when it comes to raw politics. I don't know what's going to happen in Washington. I don't suppose anybody else does either. And it's going to be really interesting to see. I don't say 4 years, I just say 1 year. I think 2017 is going to be really intriguing, where we'll all be sitting around watching the Sunday morning talk shows.
Yeah. Jim.
Representative Andrew Brenner, the chairman of the House Finance Committee, just recently dropped a bill that, after session ended, that would completely overhaul the school funding system in Ohio. Now it's a very huge change, and he knows it doesn't have really any chance of moving as it is. But it is interesting that someone in that level is actually talking about some major overhauls and major changes of a system that many still argue was never changed to address the DeRolf school funding rulings.
No local property taxes.
No local property taxes,
see.
statewide property tax.
Andy.
Like Jim just mentioned, the governor has been throwing out the possibility that we're on the verge of a recession, and now he's been discussing, he even threw out the untouchable term, the rainy day fund, which he doesn't say he wants to rely on it, but he's saying, hey, just if everything's really tight, it's there.
All right.
Don't leave 89 cents in there.
Right.
I predict John Kasich will get 1 electoral vote, thus he will finish 3rd in the race for president. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. I'm Mike Thompson. We leave you with scenes from the State House, where Friday Senator and former astronaut John Glenn lay in repose before Saturday's memorial service. Have a good week.